I don't know, man. You really think Doug Christie and Tyrese Haliburton are related?
Look at the rookie photos. Just saying. Look at the rookie photos.
Check it out.
What's up, Kings fans? Welcome to another episode of the Royal Report with Calvin and Barry. The Sacramento Kings have had an awesome week this week, winning 4 out of their last 5 games. The trade deadline is past us. The Kings have made a few moves, but we are ready to move on through the rest of the season. Huh, Calvin?
That's right. Thank you as always for watching. We're here for episode 14 of the Royal Report. On today's show, we're going to break down not only the Kings' moves at the deadline, but around the rest of the league, and look ahead to what's next for Sacramento, and will this team make the playoff push as the season comes to an end. But we begin as usual with highlights from around the league.
There's been quite a few injuries in the NBA over the last week or two, highlighted by an ankle injury last Saturday to LeBron James. LeBron has been stated to be out another 3 to 5 weeks while he undergoes treatment on that high ankle sprain. There are a few other notable injuries. As many know, Anthony Davis has been sidelined with an Achilles or a calf strain for the past few weeks. Kevin Durant is still out as well. And big news for Kings fans, the fellow Rookie of the Year candidate LaMelo Ball has sustained a broken wrist. I know this has been delightful to many Kings fans, hoping that Tyrese Haliburton could potentially win Rookie of the Year due to this injury. But, you know, we don't like to celebrate when anybody's injured. We want everybody to be healthy. I know Tyrese has come out this week stating that it made him feel sick to see people happy about the injury. Totally agree with you, Tyrese. We want a fair competition. We want everybody to be healthy. Thoughts and hopes out to LaMelo Ball. Hopefully he can return later this season or come back stronger next year. And on the category of injuries or being sidelined, Caris LeVert is officially back, scoring 28 points on Wednesday night and hitting a go-ahead three-pointer with less than 1 second to go. Calvin, I'm very happy for one to see Caris out there balling again. How about you?
Oh yeah, how can you not be? I mean, Caris was a very exciting player before he was sidelined, and it's really uplifting to see him back with his new team in a new setting, picking up right where he left off. And who knows, Indiana may end up making out better in the long run in that deal than Houston, thanks to the play of Caris LeVert. The NBA unfortunately lost one of its legends this past week as Elgin Baylor passed away at the age of 86. For those of you who aren't familiar with Elgin Baylor, he is NBA royalty. Perhaps one of the greatest players, if not the greatest, to never win a championship. He made the NBA Finals 8 times in his career with both the Minneapolis and Los Angeles Lakers, but never won that coveted ring. Baylor is one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. He averaged over 27 points per game for his career, and in 1960, he set, at the time, the NBA record with 71 points in a game. Baylor didn't stop there after he retired. He continued his greatness in the league, becoming an executive with the LA Clippers, and actually won Executive of the Year in 2006 when the Clippers won their first playoff series in 30 years.
Wow.
Rest in peace, Elgin.
Rest in peace, Elgin Baylor.
On a lighter note, happy birthday to our very own Chimezie Metu, who turned 24 this week. The Kings forward should be seeing an increased amount of playing time now that Marvin Bagley is hurt and Nemanja Bjelica has been traded. So we hope the best for Chimezie moving forward for Sacramento. Barry, you remember that team in Milwaukee that has a 2-time MVP? Yeah, I kind of forgot about them too, but don't look now. Here come the Milwaukee Bucks. They have won 8 games in a row. They've reclaimed the 2nd seed overall in the Eastern Conference, and they are looking very formidable right now. Giannis is on another MVP tear currently. In his last 10 games, he is averaging 27 points, 10.7 rebounds, and 9.2 assists while shooting 62% from the field. Milwaukee is a team that I certainly wouldn't want to play right now if I was anybody in the NBA.
Yeah, and a big addition in PJ Tucker. I think that's a really underrated move. They picked him up for cheap, and I think they are a team to watch out for in the playoffs, especially because nobody's talking about them. Speaking of streaks, the Sacramento Kings are on a 3-game winning streak, but we'll be speaking about them right after this quick break.
Handsy down low twice, knocked it away again. They got a 2-on-1. Haliburton off the feed, takes it inside and gets the layup in a quick 4-0 lead.
Welcome back. It was a fantastic week for the Sacramento Kings, who went 4-1 with some very big victories over the Celtics, Hawks, and most recently the Golden State Warriors. De'Aaron Fox continues to play at an all-star level and shine like a superstar in Sacramento. He had a career-high 44 points last night against the Warriors. Fox has now scored 29 or more in 8 of his last 10 games. He just continues to roll, and the game really continues to look like it's slowing down for him. He seems like he can get whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and he is the driving force for the Kings right now. Tyrese Haliburton is back in a big way as well. He hit a career-high 6 threes against the Warriors last night as well, being moved into the starting lineup. Barry, the question now for Sacramento is, can they sustain this success going forward? Are they going to be able to get over the hump of having these great weeks one week and then terrible weeks the next week? And will they make that final playoff push?
Well, we're going to answer that question a little bit later in the show, but what a roller coaster season it has been so far. The Sacramento Kings are finally back within range. They are 20-25 now after winning their last 3 games and 4 out of the last 5, but it has been a roller coaster season filled with winning streaks and losing streaks, and my emotions have been all over the board, but happy to see them back on the right track. I know we missed an opportunity this week against Philadelphia, not having Ben Simmons. I would have loved to win that game, but I'm happy. 4-5. New career high for De'Aaron Fox. New career high for Tyrese Haliburton. Happy to see guys balling out. Most players on the Sacramento Kings are playing extraordinarily well this week. Happy to see Richaun Holmes being his usual self. Harrison Barnes almost had a triple-double this week with like 9 points. He hasn't been big on the scoring end, but he's done all the other things and been that glue guy to hold this team together. But the story of the week is De'Aaron Fox. He is playing incredible. You can tell that he is no longer hampered by any injuries. The game is slowed down for him, and he is simply doing anything he wants on the court. As you mentioned, 44 points last night. He had another huge game the night before. I think it was like 38 points. So he is absolutely balling right now.
Yeah, the story is still the same for Sacramento. If they play to their potential offensively and they shoot from 3 like they are capable of doing, they can beat anybody in this league. But they have those nights where they aren't going to shoot quite as well as they have, this week. And defensively, they're still a big liability out there. So going forward, they're not going to shoot 50% from 3 every game. And that's how they've been getting most of these big wins, especially last night against the Warriors. That game was never really close, and I know they didn't have Steph or Draymond Green, but I'm not sure they would have won that game even if those guys were out there with how well Sacramento was shooting. So it's just the same old story for Sacramento. If they come out and shoot like they have been recently, they're tough to beat. They really are. But you're going to live by the 3 and die by the 3 is the age-old saying, right?
Yeah, and what did we talk about earlier in the season? The Kings were allowing 120 plus points a game. I don't want to say they've improved a ton on the defensive end, but whatever they're doing, teams are scoring less against them. So that is definitely making a big impact in the win category as well. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to jump into some of the moves the Sacramento Kings made before the deadline.
Or didn't make.
Holmes off the catch, banks it home.
Oh my goodness.
Welcome back. It has been a pretty somber week for the Sacramento Kings as far as the trade deadline goes. I know a lot of Sacramento Kings fans had their hopes up this week thinking a big move might be made, a blockbuster deal for a Bradley Beal or a Victor Oladipo or somebody like that. And the Kings kind of did what they did during the draft. They sat back, they took what came to them. They made a few minor deals, but it might have a big impact on this season. Corey Joseph was sent to the Detroit Pistons for DeLon Wright. Terrence Davis was picked up from the Toronto Raptors for just a second-round pick. And Nemanja Bjelica was traded to the Miami Heat for Chris Silva and Mo Harkless.
Yeah, we really were kind of anticipating there to be some sort of major movement or major deal to talk about when the trade deadline came and passed. That is not the case. Things that we thought were pretty obvious did happen, like Nemanja Bjelica being moved, and even Corey Joseph, for me, I thought made a lot of sense for the Kings to trade him as well. But, I really think that while the Kings didn't do anything major to improve their team, they may have kind of sneakily made some good moves here. In particular, DeLon Wright is a guy that I'm looking at. One, because he's a tremendous defensive guard, which is something that the Kings absolutely need. The way he's played in his career, he's an upgrade from Corey Joseph at the backup point guard position. Averaging 10 points a game this year, he pretty much got lost in Detroit like a lot of players are doing right now. But this is a guy who just 2 years ago was a pretty major piece on a championship team in Toronto. So this guy knows how to play. Like I said, he is an upgrade to me from Corey Joseph, who was already playing a ton of minutes in Sacramento before he left. Now DeLon Wright slides in fully to that backup point guard position, and he doesn't have to share it with Tyrese Haliburton, at least for now, because Tyrese is a full-time starter moving forward. So I think this makes the Kings bench better, which ultimately could really help them, and it actually helps their defensive ability as well, which is something we all know they desperately need.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a little addition by subtraction. We had mentioned the defense has been, one of the Kings' Achilles this season. And when you talk about Nemanja Bjelica, I'm a big fan of his. There's a lot of positives about his game, but defense is not one of them. And he was getting some major minutes down the stretch, and you would just see people blow right past him. He would blow defensive assignments. Sometimes he could jump in some passing lanes and get a ball or two. But for the most part, he had a tough time keeping his man in front of him. So we'll see what happens in Miami. They definitely have a better scheme than Sacramento. They have better defensive-oriented players, so they can probably hide some of his inadequacies in Miami. But overall, not super excited about all the moves the Kings made. I wanted a big move to happen as well. But as you mentioned, the bench is stronger. There's been some players moved around. Tyrese is now in the starting lineup. So bolstering the bench is important, adding some more versatility to this team. And I think that one of the biggest needs for this team was just to get healthy. We talked earlier in the season that injuries had a huge impact on the Kings. They rattled off a winning streak, and we were right in line for the playoffs, and then a couple injuries derailed them, and they lost a ton of games in a row. Shout out to all my drinkers out there. Injury was the name of the game, and they're getting healthy. I think they're making a push. It'd be interesting to see what happens with Hassan Whiteside. I know he had been mentioned as being moved or bought out. I don't know if the Kings can afford to buy him out at this point, but is he going to want to be part of this team for the rest of the season? I'm really not sure.
Yeah, it's clear to me after the deadline passed that one of two things happened in Sacramento. One, they wanted to pull the trigger on a deal with one of these guys, Buddy Hield or Harrison Barnes, somebody like that, and they just couldn't find a deal that they thought was acceptable or gave them enough in return. Or two, Monte McNair and his group sat down and they said, look, we're going to sit back, we're going to make one last run at this, try to make the playoffs with this core group of players that we have now. We think we're good enough to do it. So we'll get some, minor pieces here that can help fill in the gaps, but we're all in, pushing the chips all in on the table with this group of people that we have now. And I think that is ultimately what really happened here. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll take a look at the rest of the NBA deadline moves that were made around the league.
As many of you know, the NBA trade deadline was yesterday, Thursday, the 25th. The Kings made some small moves, but there were larger moves made around the league. Not any huge blockbuster deals as we've seen in the past couple seasons, but there were a few important pieces that moved around. Two deals that really stood out to me was Vucevic from the Magic being traded to the Chicago Bulls and Victor Oladipo being traded from the Houston Rockets to the Miami Heat. Calvin, how do you feel about the NBA trade deadline as far as the other teams go in this league?
Well, like you mentioned, there wasn't necessarily that major blockbuster deal that got made. But there were some pretty significant pieces that got moved. Like you mentioned, I think Miami and Chicago are the clear-cut winners of the trade deadline. I put Miami a little bit ahead of Chicago right now, just because if you're able to get a healthy Victor Oladipo to go along with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, that team was already an NBA Finals team a year ago, and they are super, super stacked on the defensive side of the ball. They could be really, really tough to handle moving forward. And Miami got him for pretty cheap. They didn't even have to give up Duncan Robinson or Tyler Hero or any of their major role players. So they could be really, really formidable moving forward. I also like what Chicago did, bringing in an all-star in Vucevic, and they also got a backup center in Daniel Tice from the Celtics. The problem with Chicago is they're all in on offense now. That team is not playing any defense whatsoever. They weren't playing defense before that move. So they're really going to have to score a lot of points in order to be competitive. Biggest loser for the deadline, I'm going to say the Lakers. It's hard to believe that you can say that about a team that just won the championship and got better in last offseason. But without LeBron and AD, they're currently in fourth in the Western Conference. And they, could end up sliding a little bit more without those guys. And it was expected that they would try to bring in another big man, maybe even Hassan Whiteside from the Kings, and they didn't get anyone. So I'm going to say that they are the biggest loser by far for the deadline. How about you?
Yeah, I'm probably going to agree with you on that. Them and the Houston Rockets, just because I didn't see Houston getting much value out of those players that they shipped away. I didn't see them get much for Victor Oladipo, which was surprising considering they gave up Karis LeVert to acquire him from Indiana in that three-way deal. I didn't see much value come from DeMarcus Cousins. They bought him out, and word on the street now that they are potentially going to buy out John Wall as well. That team was a championship caliber team just a year ago. They have fallen very, very far. Only 12 wins on this season, and they're getting rid of all their good players, and I don't see them acquiring many assets. So I'm going to go with Houston Rockets as my biggest loser in the trade deadline. Lakers are a close second considering they didn't make any moves, and their rivals across town, the Clippers, added a quality point guard that won a championship with the Lakers last year in Rajon Rondo. Another couple interesting moves for me were made by the Denver Nuggets. Calvin, what do you feel about Denver? What are they doing? Are they giving up on Paul Millsap at this point, or?
It certainly seems that way. I think that when you get a guy like Aaron Gordon, he's not going to spend too much time coming off the bench for you. So if Paul Millsap is willing to accept a role off the bench, I think that makes them a better team overall. I thought that Lonzo Ball going to Denver would have made more sense necessarily, but still an interesting move. You know, Denver, for the past couple years now, I think they felt like they're one guy away from being, you know, a potential NBA champion. So interesting move there. Maybe they were just kind of grasping at straws too, feeling like they had to make some sort of move, and that was, you know, right there in front of them, something they could easily take advantage of. But very interesting. And then that deal you just mentioned too with Rajon Rondo, interesting to see how Lou Williams does going down to Atlanta. He can come off the bench for that team that already can shoot lights out. Doesn't sound like great news for Bogdan Bogdanovic when you bring in a guy like Lou Williams, but this is a team that's already really hot right now, and adding a sixth man of the year, perennial sixth man of the year, could end up making them, you know, even better. So very interesting moves made around the league, but that's all we have time for the NBA deadline. When we come back, we're going to start talking again about the Sacramento Kings and what's next for them as they head down the second half of the season.
Under 1.5 to go here in the first quarter. Haliburton says, why not? He's got 3 already. Make it 4, making it rain here.
Well, as the trade deadline has come and passed, the Sacramento Kings, from a roster standpoint, are very much in the same type of situation as they were before the deadline. The question now remains for Sacramento, what's next? Are they going to be able to make a postseason run here? Are they going to continue to develop guys like Marvin Bagley when he comes back? Is he going to be a starter? Are they going to move him to the bench? Tyrese Haliburton and De'Aaron Fox are now the clear-cut co-leaders of this team. They're the guys who are going to make the engine run for Sacramento. And really another question for Sacramento moving forward is, are they going to be all in on re-signing Richaun Holmes? You know, I think that as the deadline has come and gone, there are now more questions to be answered in Sacramento than there was necessarily before the deadline. Buddy Hield is another guy. Where does he fit in the grand scheme of things? Is he going to remain a starter on this team and a serious contributing player? Are they going to keep him at the 3? You know, there's a lot of stuff that's up in the air here, but the biggest question is, will they make the playoffs ultimately?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that question when we get to the next category. But for me, it kind of feels like just after every other trade deadline, as a Kings fan, what is next from here? Where do we move on? Normally at this point, I'm looking at mock drafts. I'm looking at college players. I'm watching the tournament, trying to figure out who is going to be on the Kings next year. And as you mentioned, clear cut. Tyrese Haliburton, De'Aaron Fox are the clear leaders of this team, the leaders. They are going to be starters through the rest of the season. And I think everybody else is kind of just going to be taken as a grain of salt or by how well they're playing. I think we could potentially see Buddy get moved to the bench, kind of like last season. But this team is similar to the Bulls in the fact that they can score a lot of points, and maybe we're just going to try and outscore teams for the rest of the season. I was happy seeing that the moves we did make created some more financial flexibility for the Kings coming this offseason and next year, and I know that had been preached by the front office, so happy to see they are sticking with that. I think there was a very tough balance in deciding whether to blow this team up, keep financial flexibility, or compete for next season, and I think that Monty has kind of found a middle road of a way to compete for the rest of the season and also still have that cap space. As we saw last offseason, with the 12th pick, you can get a pretty good player. So we're not in a race for the number 1 or number 2 or top 5 pick. We are in a race for that playoff spot. We need to change the culture in Sacramento, and that starts with winning. And so I think the Kings have kind of shown that is where they are headed. I hope we can make it to that playoff spot. But I still find myself scratching my head. There is a lot more questions, as you mentioned, than before the deadline. What's next? I think we're going to be talking about this every week.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And I do want to mention one thing. I admit I was wrong. When Tyrese Haliburton was drafted, I questioned whether or not he and De'Aaron Fox could play together long term and really share the court, as a starting backcourt. I've changed my mind on that. I think that they absolutely can, and it's clear to me that Sacramento, the guys in the front office in Sacramento think that as well, and that's everything that they're doing right now is making that push for those guys to be the cornerstones of this franchise moving forward, and I think it's a positive, very positive thing for Sacramento.
Yeah, and you had mentioned this team goes as far as they shoot, right? And there was questions about whether Tyrese Haliburton's shot was going to transition to the NBA, and there was questions about De'Aaron Fox's shot. And both of them have shot tremendously this year, and that has been a major reason why they have fit so well together, in my opinion.
And pace here tonight. Good pass. Nice pass. Mitu catches a body underneath.
All right, we're back, and we're talking about rotations, specifically the Sacramento Kings rotation through the rest of the season. And as we had mentioned earlier, Tyrese Haliburton is now a starter. Marvin Bagley is injured. Not sure what's going to happen with him in the next 4 to 6 weeks when he comes back. But Calvin, if you are coaching this team, what is your starting and finishing rotation looking like?
Well, it's probably going to be pretty similar to what it is right now. I think the biggest question for the Kings rotation-wise is who's coming off the bench and who's playing what position. Marvin Bagley is the big wild card. When he comes back from injury, is he back in the starting lineup, or do they decide to slowly acclimate him back to full-time playing status by playing him off the bench? And I think if they do that, they could actually be a better team. I know Marvin has earned a starting role when he's been healthy, but when you think about it, with Tyrese Haliburton in the starting lineup and that smaller overall lineup with Buddy Hield and Harrison Barnes at the 4, I like that lineup, and I like Tyrese and De'Aaron Fox playing together as much as possible, having two guys that can handle the ball and shoot and score as easily as they can, as well as distribute. And when you think about it, with the additions that they've made through the deadline, getting a backup point guard in DeLon Wright, who I think could be very helpful to them going forward. Terrence Davis is a guy who was second-team All-Rookie a year ago. We know he can score. We know he can shoot. To have those guys paired with somebody like Marvin Bagley off the bench, as well as Hassan Whiteside, that could be a formidable second unit that the Kings could really use to their advantage moving forward.
Yeah, and we had talked about, trust, and Coach Walton has a closing lineup that he trusts, and that included Corey Joseph, who has been shipped out. So who's going to be filling in for Corey's minutes? We've seen him 30 minutes, 34, 28 minutes. Who's going to be getting those minutes, Cal?
I think it's got to be DeLon Wright. I don't know of any other player right now that makes more sense other than necessarily Terrence Davis. If he comes in and he picks up right away and he's scoring a ton of points, then I could see that. But I think DeLon Wright is a guy who, he's a veteran, he's a champion in this league. He's a good perimeter defender. I think he can really hold down the backup point guard spot. And in this offense that Luke Walton likes to play with 3 point guards, sometimes even 3 point guards on the court at the same time, he makes obvious sense to me.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we will dive into the playoffs.
Playoffs?
Talking about the playoffs.
What's that? Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs?
Welcome back to the Row Report. The topic of the decade really has been, will the Sacramento Kings make the playoffs? This year it's no different. The Kings are currently just on the outside looking in of that play-in tournament, which has been extended to the 9th and 10th seeds this season, which does give Sacramento a better chance overall of making some form of postseason play. Unfortunately, I just don't know whether or not it's going to be enough for the Kings to crack the code and be one of those final 8 teams. They didn't really make any major improvements through the trade deadline. We have said it before on this show that they can play with anybody, but they're just not a good defensive team at all. And I see them being a make the play-in tournament but lose in that play-in tournament as sort of a best case scenario for this team. They've got some really bright spots in De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Haliburton, and I think that the future is potentially very bright for this team. But in terms of this year alone, in that tough Western Conference, I just don't know which of those 8 teams I'm going to say, yeah, the Kings are going to replace them. Memphis is even playing better now. New Orleans is still on the outside looking in, and they're a serious wild card. The Warriors are still currently in that top 10 top 10 teams in the Western Conference. It's just going to be really, really tough for the Kings to make that breakthrough move and get into one of those final 8 seeds.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the Kings probably had a better chance last year in the bubble just because everything was weird and strange and new, and I felt like teams were on a more level playing ground. But you're right. You look at the standings, you look at the West, I don't really see any of those top 8 teams that aren't going to make the playoffs. As weird as it sounds, the only team there that stands out to me would be the San Antonio Spurs. They're 22-20, have an awesome coach. They have some good young players. They have some established veteran players. I know LaMarcus Aldridge is on his way out. I don't know if that's really going to affect them much, and they're going to lose many games because of that departure. I think the Kings will make the play-in tournament, but unfortunately, I think they will lose in that play-in tournament.
Yeah, it's really a shame, another year of us talking about how the Kings are so close and yet they're going to fall short. But, I don't see, like we said, in the West, I just don't see how you're going to crack through there, especially when you have to, the odds are stacked against you, not having to win just 1 potentially, but 2 games in a row against playoff level competition. And for a team that is one of the worst defensive teams in the league, in a 1-game situation, unless they come out and shoot 60% from the field and 50% from 3 like they did, against the Warriors last night, it's sort of an NCAA tournament type of Cinderella feel to it. But in the NBA, it doesn't necessarily work like that. So just another year for us Sacramento Kings fans.
It is, but it's okay. We got to stay positive. Look at Phoenix. They were horrible last year. And what are they, number 2 now in the West? So
they're doing very
anything's
well.
possible. Kings fans, keep it up. Keep supporting the team. We'll be in the playoffs before you know it.
When we come back, questions from the Kingdom.
Guess what? I got a fever. And the only prescription is more cowbell.
Welcome back. It's time to turn the show over to our loyal fans out there. As always, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for your views. Thank you for your likes. Thank you for subscribing to this channel. And most importantly for this segment, thank you for your questions. If you have a question that you'd like Barry and I to answer on a future show, please submit it in the comment section underneath this video with the hashtag #CowbellQuestions following it. With that being said, let's take our first question for this week's episode from the announcer.
Are you happy with the Sacramento Kings moves before the deadline?
Yes and no. I'm happy we're still competing. I'm happy we're not tanking. I'm happy we have financial flexibility at the end of the season. I wanted a big deal to happen. I wanted to welcome a guy like Bradley Beal to the team. I wanted to have another guy that I was so excited about. But overall, I'm happy with the patience. I'm happy we didn't overpay anybody. I'm happy we didn't make any bad moves that will set us back in the future.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off that last sentence that you said. I don't think I'm necessarily either happy or unhappy with the moves that were made. I'm pretty much just stagnant because they really didn't make a ton of moves. But I am happy with the fact that if the organization feels like this is a group that they're content with and happy with moving forward and thinks that it can make a playoff run potentially, whether it be at the end of this year or going into next year, I'm happy that they didn't take any gambles or big risks and potentially mess up any chemistry that they already have on this team. So ultimately, I expected there to be more moves, but I'm happy with the fact that they are taking a stance and showing confidence in the group that they have.
And we didn't give away any of our valuable players for nothing, so happy about that too. Next question.
Does this team have a direction?
Well, kind of similar to my answer from the previous question, the team definitely has a direction. They want to win. They want to make the playoffs. Did they do anything necessarily to greatly increase those chances? No, they did not. So the direction for me is De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Haliburton are the future of this franchise. Everything else is going to fall into place when you're sitting in the chair of Monte McNair.
Yeah, it's really hard to answer this question given that Monty has not even had a full season under his belt as GM of this team. But as an optimist and a hopeful Kings fan, I look back to times where I've seen famous artists drawing a beautiful painting or a picture, and the first quarter or half of the picture, the drawing, you can't tell what it is. It doesn't really look like anything. And then they start adding color and more lines and stuff like that, and you finally start to see this whole picture come together, and all you can think about is, how could this person see this picture in their head? And all the lines and the scribbles and everything they made earlier all make sense. And that's all I can hope for this Kings team, is I'm hoping Monty is painting a masterpiece. And I just think that I hope that we just all can't see it at this point, and hopefully in the next year or two it will rear its head.
A work of art.
A work of art. Next question.
Is De'Aaron Fox a superstar?
Well, the answer to this question really depends on what your definition of a superstar is. And a lot of people have different definitions of that necessarily. I'm going to say that there are only a few superstars in the entire league. Therefore, De'Aaron Fox is currently not one of them. However, he's a new star, a rising star. This guy, remember, is only 23 years old. And he's having the best year of his career. I think he could be potentially a 30-point, 8-9 assists, 7-8 rebound guy for the next 7 years in a row. That would be, putting him into an elite category. Unfortunately, there are a lot of other elite point guards in this league. It's just a very guard-dominated league right now. But this guy has all the potential, all the ability to eventually get to that superstar level. He's got to become an all-star first before he becomes a superstar. I will just say that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that Calvin and I have had many arguments about the definition of a superstar and how many there are in this league. And what exactly is a superstar? Is it based on ability? Is it based on name recognition, sales, wins? All that stuff. I think we both agree that De'Aaron Fox is not a superstar at this point, but he is well on his way. Happy to see what he's doing for the Sacramento Kings, and hopefully we can say yes in a few more years.
Next question.
Where does Buddy Hield fit on this team?
Very good question. I kind of expected Buddy Hield to not be on this team, even going back to the beginning of the season. So when you think about where does he fit in now, he's moved from the shooting guard position to the small forward position. He seems to be slowly developing into a less and less role in terms of an offensive standpoint on this team with the emergence of Tyrese Haliburton, a guy who is more efficient, can shoot from three at a higher percentage than Buddy Hield can. Buddy is just very streaky. We've chronicled many times on this show his inability to play defense. So, I still don't think that there is a long-term future for Buddy Hield on this team. A lot of it is going to depend on whether or not Luke Walton is the head coach next year, I think, in terms of what his, real role will be on the team moving forward and going into next season. But I don't see there being a long-term fit for Buddy Hield on this team.
Yeah, I think volume shooters that don't play defense belong on the bench. I'm not saying that in a negative way at all. I think it's a very useful role to have somebody that can come off your bench and help score when your teams are going through those lulls and while you're resting your star players. But that comes down to your question on whether Buddy Hield is a long-term fit on this team and whether they're going to spend the rest of this year showcasing him so that hopefully they can trade him in the offseason, or they are going to do what's best for the Kings and bring him off the bench no matter what it does to him as far as mental and all that stuff, and see what happens at the end of the season.
Yeah, and another factor to take into consideration is his contract. They paid him big money. So to have a guy coming off your bench making that much money, it kind of doesn't seem like make a lot of sense, especially if that individual is not happy with that role coming off the bench and it's going to ultimately affect his play. So it's a very interesting, probably the most interesting, I would say, storyline to watch with the Kings moving forward is what happens to Buddy Hield, whether it's by the end of this year, in the offseason, going into next season. But that's all the time we have for Cowbell Questions. Thank you again for your submissions. When we come back, we're going to wrap up the show and look ahead to next week.
Elects not to try and post up Mannion. Step back three on the way. Foul! Count it! Let's go for 4!
Thanks for watching, guys. Only 3 games this week. 1 game against the Cleveland Cavaliers in Sacramento. Cleveland has been struggling since their red-hot start earlier this season. They have dipped out of the playoff race in the Eastern Conference. And then 2 games against the San Antonio Spurs, both games in San Antonio. I know the Spurs have been hovering around that 8th spot. As we mentioned earlier, LaMarcus Aldridge is being bought out. So 3 competitive games for the Kings this week. Calvin, how many games are we winning?
3 games. Keep the streak alive, right? I certainly expect a win against the Cavaliers coming up. And then couple of tough games against San Antonio. Real good opportunity for Sacramento, though, to gain some ground in the playoff race against a team that's currently sitting in one of those 8 spots. And I'm looking forward to watching the matchup between De'Aaron Fox and DeJounte Murray, 2 players that have pretty similar styles. Both bigger guards, can get up and down the floor, play defense, and really score as well. So it's going to be a fun back-to-back setting to watch there in those 2 games.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for joining us on this week's episode 14 of the Royal Report, a Sacramento Kings-based talk show. We'll be back next Friday for episode 15. We hope to see you all then. In the meantime, go Kings!
Go Kings!
Thanks, guys.